On the night of June 11, 1962, in Alcatraz prison, famously known as the Rock and regarded globally as an escape-proof fortress, 3 inmates decided to challenge the impossible. With nothing but primitive tools, they managed to plan and execute a daring escape that stunned the entire world. How did they widen the narrow ventilation shafts? How did they craft a boat out of basic materials? And what happened to them after they fled the prison? These questions left the world wondering, did they actually succeed in achieving the impossible and reach their destination? Or did they meet their end in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay? Welcome. Today, I'll tell you the story of the impossible escape from Alcatraz. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. In 1934, Alcatraz Island was transformed from a military base into a high-security federal prison. It was dubbed the Rock due to its isolated location in the middle of San Francisco Bay. The prison was designed to be escape-proof, a claim backed by numerous failed escape attempts over the years. It was built to hold the most dangerous criminals in the United States, those that no other prison could control. As a result, security was extremely tight. Watchtowers with floodlights illuminated the prison day and night. Guards were highly trained, alarm systems lined every corridor, and even the slightest unusual movement would trigger an immediate response. The cold waters surrounding the island were part of the security system too, with year-round low temperatures, strong currents that could drag swimmers away, and rumors of shark-infested waters. Alcatraz wasn't just a prison, it was a symbol of fear and intimidation. Inmates who spent long periods there told tragic stories of daily despair and terror. Thick, concrete walls, narrow cells, long sleepless nights, and the sound of waves crashing against the rocky shore made it a living nightmare. That's why any escape attempt was seen as sheer madness. Since its opening in 1934, many inmates attempted to escape, but most ended up either dead or recaptured. Each failed attempt only reinforced the prison's reputation as an impenetrable fortress, deepening the despair of those who dreamed, even secretly, of escape. Now, let me tell you about one of the earliest and most famous failed escape attempts, to show you just how difficult it really was. The first escape attempt occurred in 1936. The man behind it was inmate Joseph Bowers, who was assigned to burn garbage in the prison's incinerator. On April 27, while performing his usual duties, he suddenly made a run for it and began climbing the prison fence at the edge of the island. It was obvious he was trying to escape. When the tower guards spotted him, they shouted for him to stop and come down immediately, but he ignored their commands and continued climbing. At that moment, the guards hitting Bowers. He fell from a great height, and the impact caused fatal injuries that led to his death. This event later became known as the Desperate Escapee, showing just how far inmates were willing to go for a chance at freedom. On December 16, 1937, a year after Bowers' attempt, 2 inmates, Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe, who worked in the prison's workshop, spent months slowly sawing through the iron bars on a window. One day, when a thick fog completely engulfed the island, they decided it was the perfect time to make their move. Using the fog as cover, they slipped through the window and made their way to the edge of the island, then jumped into the water. From that moment on, they were never seen again. But the problem was that day wasn't just foggy. It was brutally cold, and the waters were rough with violent currents. Authorities believed they had drowned. However, since no bodies were ever found, some speculated they may have been swept away or even survived. Just in case, the FBI placed them on its most wanted list. Almost a year later, on Friday night, January 13, 1939, another escape attempt took place, but it ended in tragedy. 5 of Alcatraz's most dangerous inmates, Arthur Barker, William Martin, Rufus McCain, Henry Young, and Dale Stamphill, were all held in the most secure section of the prison. Yet somehow, they managed to escape their cells, using makeshift tools they crafted themselves. Once free, they quietly made their way toward the island's shore. Their plan was to construct a raft, using materials they had secretly gathered over time. They actually began building the raft, but the guards in the watchtowers noticed suspicious movement on the shore. As soon as they realized what was happening, they opened fire from all directions. Arthur Barker was fatally shot and died instantly, while Dale Stamphill sustained serious injuries but survived. The remaining 3 inmates were captured and placed under even stricter security, and complete isolation. Several years passed, during which a few minor escape attempts occurred, but they all ended in failure as well. Then came April 14, 1943, when a daring escape attempt was carried out by 4 inmates who also worked in the prison's workshop: James Borman, Harold Brest, Floyd Hamilton, and Fred Hunter. While working in the shop, they sawed through the iron bars on one of the windows, cutting them one by one. They also stole 4 bags used by guards to store their uniforms, intending to use them as flotation devices during the escape. On the night of the attempt, the inmates attacked 2 guards, tied their hands and gagged them, then escaped through the window. But during the escape, one of the guards managed to sound his whistle, prompting the other to trigger the alarm. As soon as the tower guards heard it, they opened fire on the fleeing inmates. James Borman was shot and fell into the water, losing consciousness. Harold Brest tried to save him, keeping him afloat with one of the bags. But when the prison boat drew near, Brest was forced to let go of Borman in hopes of escaping himself. James drowned, and his body was never found. At the same time, Fred Hunter was shot in the back and arms. Realizing he couldn't swim, he decided to hide in a cave on the island. After 2 hours of searching, guards spotted blood traces at the cave entrance and quickly surrounded it. Hunter surrendered without resistance and was captured. The only inmate still unaccounted for was Floyd Hamilton. Guards initially believed he had drowned like Borman, but in truth, Hamilton was hiding in the same cave that Hunter had used. After spending 2 days in the cave, Hamilton lost hope and returned to the workshop window he had used during the escape. He hid in the storage room and was captured the following day. Thus, James Borman paid for the escape attempt with his life, while Brest, Hunter, and Hamilton were all returned to prison under harsher conditions than before. 2 more years passed, during which several other escape attempts failed quickly. Then came 1946, the year of one of the most violent escape attempts in Alcatraz's history, an event that would later be known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Between May 2 and May 4, a group of inmates attempted a large-scale escape. They were Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, Sam Shockley, Clarence Carnes, Marvin Hubbard, and Miran Thompson. The 6 inmates began their plan by taking control of the cell block area. They overpowered the guards, reached the armory, and seized the weapons stored there. Their plan was to escape using the prison launch boat. But when they failed to open the outer door of the prison, they chose to engage in a direct confrontation. A violent standoff began, during which they held 2 prison guards hostage. After 2 days of intense fighting, Joseph Kretzer shot the hostages. As the situation escalated, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes lost hope and returned to their cells. But Bernard Coy, Joseph Kretzer, and Marvin Hubbard refused to surrender. The conflict intensified so severely that the U.S. Navy had to intervene. After fierce combat, the American forces managed to kill the 3 resisting inmates. After the battle, Shockley, Thompson, and Carnes were put on trial for the murder of the prison guard. Shockley and Thompson were sentenced to death, while Clarence Carnes, who was only 19 years old at the time, received a life sentence. Other escape attempts followed, but all ended in swift failure. All of the failed escapes I've shared with you so far clearly show just how difficult it was to escape from this prison. Each failed attempt only cemented Alcatraz's reputation as an impenetrable fortress, sending a clear message to other inmates. Escape isn't just impossible, it will cost you your life. But all of that changed in 1962, specifically on the night of June 11th, when Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers John and Clarence decided to carry out their bold escape plan on a quiet summer night. The plan required extreme precision and flawless execution, something that took them months to prepare. Frank Morris was the mastermind behind the operation, and he chose the Anglin brothers because of their well-known swimming skills. Each of the 3 men had a life story full of events that shaped their personalities and pushed them to consider escaping from a prison the world deemed inescapable. Frank Morris was born on September 1, 1926. He lost both parents when he was just 11 years old and had to spend his childhood in a foster home in Washington. From there, his path into crime began at an early age. His first offense came at age 13, the start of a series of crimes including drug possession. Frank Morris was known for his sharp intelligence and advanced criminal skills. He became infamous for armed robberies and car thefts. Every time he was arrested, he would devise elaborate escape plans, earning him the reputation of the smart criminal who couldn't be kept behind bars. Morris scored 133 on an IQ test, placing him in the top 2% of the global population. He wasn't just intelligent, he also had an exceptional ability to plan and organize. For him, breaking out of prison was like a strategic game. His last escape happened just a year before he arrived at Alcatraz. He managed to break out of a Louisiana prison, where he was serving a long sentence for bank robbery. He remained on the run for a full year before being arrested again, while attempting another robbery. In January 1960, Morris was transferred to Alcatraz, as the authorities believed it was the only place capable of finally containing him. But for Morris, this was simply a greater challenge. He was convinced that not even Alcatraz could hold him. From his very first day, Morris began studying every detail: guard schedules, camera locations, how the doors operated. Any piece of information, no matter how small, could be vital. About a year after his arrival, he learned that 2 inmates he had known previously were also being transferred to Alcatraz: John and Clarence Anglin. John Anglin was born on May 2, 1930, and Clarence was exactly 1 year younger. They were born in the state of Georgia, into a poor farming family with 14 siblings. From a young age, the entire family worked in agriculture. As children, the Anglin brothers regularly competed in swimming contests held in icy lakes, and they often won. This gave them a remarkable ability to swim in cold waters, but poverty eventually led them into crime. Their criminal career began with petty thefts, like stealing chickens or crops from the farms they worked on. Over time, their crimes escalated to bank robbery in the early 1950s. Their heists were known for being bold yet precise. They would rob banks in broad daylight without harming anyone. According to their own statements, they never carried a real weapon. The only time they were seen with a gun, it turned out to be a toy. On January 17, 1958, during an attempted robbery at a bank in Columbia, Alabama, they were caught and sentenced to 35 years in prison. They served part of that sentence in a Florida state prison, but after attempting to escape, they were transferred to the federal prison in Leavenworth. There they tried to escape again, and so they were moved to the Atlanta prison, where they made yet another escape attempt. Finally, the authorities concluded only Alcatraz is suitable for these two. John arrived at Alcatraz on October 24, 1960. Followed by Clarence on January 16, 1961. When the brothers reunited with Morris, it took only a few days for their old acquaintance to grow into a strong friendship, especially after they learned about Morris's intelligence and his reputation for prison escapes. Morris, in turn, saw in them the perfect partners for his escape plan. Their swimming ability, especially in cold water, made them ideal allies who could help him swim across San Francisco Bay if the escape succeeded. While studying the prison's weak spots, they were overheard by another inmate named Alan West, whose cell was next to Morris's. West contacted them and claimed he knew of a possible escape route, on the condition that they take him with them. West worked cleaning the area above the cell block. During his duties, he discovered a ventilation duct that led to the prison's roof. When Morris heard this, he realized it might be the opportunity he'd been waiting for. He used his intelligence to begin crafting a detailed escape plan based on that discovery. Upon studying the prison's layout, Morris found that there were small ventilation grills located beneath the sinks in each cell. These led to narrow maintenance corridors that were all connected, and through them, they could potentially reach the ventilation shaft West had mentioned. But there was one major problem. These vents were incredibly small, too narrow for a full-grown adult to fit through, no matter how slim. The vents were far too narrow for a full-grown adult, even a thin one, to pass through. This marked the first real challenge in what would become the most famous prison escape in history. Using his intelligence, Frank Morris was able to exploit one of Alcatraz's structural weaknesses. The salty seawater surrounding the prison had gradually eroded parts of the concrete walls, making some areas weaker than others. One such vulnerable area was around the air vents in the cells, places that didn't receive the same routine maintenance as other, more exposed sections of the prison. Morris realized that with simple tools, he could slowly enlarge the vent holes enough to squeeze through. The first step in their plan was to steal metal soup spoons from the prison kitchen to use for digging. But there were two main problems: how to hide the growing holes and how to ensure that no one heard the sounds of digging from outside the cells. After discussing it among themselves, the four conspirators agreed that the best time to dig would be from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., when inmates were allowed to play music. This would help mask the noise of their work. They took turns watching the guards' movements to ensure they weren't discovered. After each digging session, they concealed the hole using cardboard painted the same color as the wall and placed random junk in front of it to avoid suspicion. Weeks into the operation, Morris, as the mastermind, began looking for tools to speed up the process. He found a rusty saw blade discarded in one of the prison's storage rooms, as well as an old vacuum cleaner. He disassembled the vacuum and used the motor to build a primitive drilling device to aid in the escape. By that time, many inmates had learned about what was happening in Morris's cell and those of his companions. Some testimonies claim that as many as 80 prisoners knew of the escape plot. However, none of them reported it, either out of solidarity or a desire to shatter the legend of the inescapable Alcatraz. In fact, some helped them or at least stayed silent. Gradually, the plan evolved further. They began crafting fake heads made of soap, paper, and the dust from the digging. These were placed on their beds to make it appear as though they were sleeping during the nights they were working. Clarence Anglin was responsible for collecting hair for the dummy heads, as he worked in the prison barbershop. After months of digging and tunnel expansion, only one major challenge remained. How would they cross the freezing bay waters and reach land without drowning or being attacked by sharks? One day, Morris stumbled upon an article in Popular Mechanics magazine. It explained how to build an inflatable raft out of rubber materials. Using simple tools and the idea from the article, Morris came up with a plan to build a raft. The main material would come from the winter coats issued to inmates for cold weather. These jackets contained rubberized fabric. Over time, they collected more than 50 coats. They also stole an old sewing machine from the prison workshop and used steam pipes to heat the rubber and seal the seams. Not stopping there, they discreetly stole wood and nails to build paddles for steering the raft. The only thing left was to find a safe, hidden space to assemble the raft. And that's where Alan West came in again. He knew of an abandoned area in the prison that no guards ever visited. West deliberately swept the dirt from the tunneling onto the walkway beneath the cells, causing it to fall on the guards below. When the guards complained, he asked them for old blankets to cover the area and prevent the dust from falling while he cleaned. This move, getting the guards to unwittingly help him conceal the escape site, was one of the most brilliant parts of the plan. The hidden area West chose was the very same one connected to the ventilation shaft, the escape route they had identified from the beginning. Thanks to meticulous planning, they managed to dig tunnels from their cells into this abandoned area. Over time, they transported all the materials and tools they'd collected from the workshop into what became a secret, makeshift workshop at the heart of Alcatraz. They accessed it only through the hidden tunnels they dug, and only when guard patrols were minimal. Of course, they never forgot to leave their dummy heads on their pillows to make the cells appear occupied. At this stage, the plan was nearly complete. Each man knew exactly what his role was and what he needed to do next. They trained daily on the escape steps to ensure they could execute them quickly and without error. The raft was the most critical element. It was their only hope of getting off the island, so it had to be ready to perfection before escape night. In the days leading up to that night, the four prisoners reviewed every detail, tested the raft and life vests, and began preparing themselves mentally for the final phase. Around 9 p.m., Morris, John, and Clarence were sitting quietly in their cells, waiting for the guards to complete their final nightly head count. When the moment finally arrived, they began removing the cardboard panels that covered the tunnel openings. But a major setback hit Alan West. He couldn't open the hole in his cell. The cement he had used to hold the panel in place had hardened completely. After several desperate attempts, West realized he wouldn't make it. He gave up and returned to his cell, resigning himself to his fate. Meanwhile, Morris and the Anglin brothers successfully reached the utility corridor and began climbing the pipes leading to the prison's roof. After descending from the roof, they faced their next obstacle. The tall perimeter fences topped with barbed wire. Using the crude tools they had made, they cut through the wires and reached the island's northern shore. There, they began inflating the raft, using a modified musical instrument that Morris had rigged to silently pump air. Then, they set out into the frigid waters, battling the strong currents, heading toward Angel Island, and from there, the mainland. By morning, around 7 a.m., the guards began their routine rounds to wake the inmates, only to discover that Morris, John, and Clarence were unresponsive. Despite repeated calls, none of them responded. When one guard finally entered the cell to check, he found not a prisoner, but a dummy head on the pillow. At that moment, chaos erupted throughout the prison. Guards began searching every corner for the missing inmates. Authorities were immediately notified, and a team from the FBI arrived to launch an investigation into the escape. The first person interrogated was Alan West, due to the hole found in his cell, which resembled those in the other three. Faced with the evidence, West confessed and revealed the entire plan from the beginning. Based on his statement, a massive search began across the island and the surrounding waters. It became one of the largest manhunts in FBI history. The next morning, FBI agents found a paddle floating in the bay, along with other items believed to have belonged to the escapees. However, there was no trace of any bodies, neither in the water nor along the nearby shores. Upon reaching Angel Island, investigators discovered a plastic bag containing family photos of the Anglins and some personal belongings. This sparked a burning question. Did the three men really make it out alive, or did they drown in the freezing water after leaving Angel Island? In the years following the escape, many theories emerged. Some claimed the trio had successfully fled and were living in hiding. These claims were bolstered by unsigned postcards and letters occasionally sent to their families. For instance, the mother of John and Clarence Anglin reportedly received letters from an unknown sender. At her funeral, two oddly dressed women were seen in attendance. They left immediately afterward, leading many to believe the women were actually John and Clarence in disguise. In 1975, 13 years after the escape, a photo surfaced of two men living in Brazil whose facial features strongly resembled John and Clarence. No one was ever able to locate them after that. After 15 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case, concluding that the three men had most likely drowned. However, in 2013, a surprising twist occurred. The FBI received a letter from someone claiming to be John Anglin, stating that he was living in San Francisco, that he was the only survivor of the escape, and that he was dying of cancer and willing to surrender in exchange for medical treatment. Authorities dismissed the letter as a hoax. To this day, no one knows for certain whether the three men succeeded in their escape and lived out their lives in freedom, or perished before reaching safety. But one thing is certain: they became legends, tied forever to the myth of Alcatraz, the prison once believed to be inescapable. And with that, we've reached the end of the story. Share your thoughts with us, and if you have a tale you'd like us to tell, leave it for us in the comments below.